the Democratic Party championed affordable education, and so, in short, it became the champion of the less advantaged element in American society. And it was at this time, very critically, that the African American communities lined up behind the Democratic Party. The Republicans became a traditional right-wing party, centre-right party. They were in favour of unregulated business, they were in favour of lower taxes, they were in favour, I won't say anything about the foreign policy, but they were in favour of a strong America on the world stage, and so they were strongly in favour of defence spending, this kind of thing. So that party system, the traditional left-right party system, lasted really about until the 1980s. And then, in the 1980s, we enter on a second phase of the American party system's evolution. And it was driven, a number of changes were introduced, and they were driven by the emergence in American politics of what are called morality issues. In other words, these are issues that deal with sexual preference, they deal with abortion, they deal with kind of things that most of us consider to be very private, and the state in America, the government, started interfering in these issues in the eyes of many. So the catalyst was actually in 1964. There was a very famous Supreme Court case called Roe versus Wade. And in this case, the Supreme Court decided that American women had the right to choose to have a baby or not until the third trimester. This was then followed by legislation guaranteeing blacks the vote, removing barriers to blacks. There was an Equal Rights Amendment for women, all women, not just African American, in 1972. We've seen, in more recent years, we've seen same-sex marriage being declared constitutional by the Supreme Court. We now have a big issue of how we treat transgender people. And so this new kind of issue emerged. And it blurred the traditional distinction, the traditional left-right distinction between Democrats and Republicans. Because generally speaking, the people who were against individual choice in these rights, they were generally people of lower education, of lower status in society. In other words, generally people who we would have expected to vote Democratic. Right? But they prioritized their kind of religious feelings or whatever. And so the kind of the epitome of these people, they were called the Reagan Democrats. These were people who in terms of their employment, their career prospects, their income levels, would have been expected to be clear Democratic supporters, but they liked Ronald Reagan, and so they started voting on the basis other than their economic interests. This election, so the major point I want to make is that the traditional lines have been getting blurred for a long time, getting harder to distinguish the Democrats and the Republicans, and getting harder to predict who would vote for them. This election complicates matters still further, because it is being fought in good part around two novel but highly salient issues. The first is free trade, and the second is immigration. And I'll talk about the meat in a moment, but again, what these issues are doing is blurring the relationship between the traditional Democratic and Republican parties and their supporters. So the people who are most against immigration are white working class males who feel that their jobs are being threatened. These are people in the past would have been expected to walk into the division, walk into the polling booth and vote Democrat across the interesting one is free trade. America's commitment to free trade, well, America's always been committed to free trade. But Ronald Reagan, along with Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister was elected in 1979, Mr. Reagan was elected in 1980, they made free trade into a crusade. They wanted to remove barriers to trade, they wanted to reduce government regulation of the economy, they wanted to roll back the state, cut back taxes, and allow the market to operate relatively unhindered by government interference. The consequence of this, in both, in both Britain and the United States, but across the rich world really, this set in process, a set in motion of process we now call globalization. And one of the things that globalization has done, because it's involved the government getting out of kind of the social and economic life of the nation, one of the consequences of globalization has been a vast increase in income inequality in the United States. Poor people are poorer, rich people are richer. And it's led many people to question what's always driven American society, which is the American dream. The idea that anybody, through hard work, individual initiative, can get ahead in life. The boy from the backwoods becoming president of the United States. In fact, if we look at the country now, not only have an older generation been living in economic hard times for a long time now, their children don't have the same prospects. Social mobility has pretty much disappeared in the United States. Lots of sociology, lots of studies suggest. So in other words, the idea that you can be born into a relatively poor household, get educated, do well, and become filthy rich has pretty much gone. There is very little social mobility in America. And so a lot of the people who are worst affected by growing inequality blame it on free trade. They blame it on the loss of jobs, actually to countries like China, Mexico, low wage, low regulation economies, where firms were able to manufacture at much lower cost and make much higher profits. And so, in Donald Trump, one of his kind of sources of popularity is his opposition to free trade. He's going to re-examine all the free trade agreements. He's going to bring American jobs back home. He is going to make America great again. This is what he means. So, in his vision, and this is what a lot of the people who support him want, Ohio will become an industrial manufacturing state again. fat chance. But this is what he's saying. And it's being believed by a lot of people. Hillary Clinton, whose husband, Bill Clinton, was a champion of free trade. It was actually Bill Clinton who signed the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1993. It was one of his first acts as president when he was elected in 1992, became president in 1993, signed the North American Free Trade Agreement. Hillary has always preached free trade. But even she now knows that it's something of an electoral liability. So she is backpedaling on free trade issues. And what she is saying is she will re-examine the existing free trade agreements, get a better deal for the United States, and she will deal with the fallout from free trade by retraining workers, by creating opportunities in the United States, by investing heavily in infrastructure renewal so that thousands and thousands and thousands of well-paying jobs will be created. But the issue is, for the first time in modern American history, free trade is an issue in this election. And it's aligning poor, low-skilled, lowly educated Americans with Donald Trump. So again, the Democrats are losing what you might call their natural base of support. One of their hopes comes from the second major issue that's kind of relatively new in this election, which is immigration. And especially immigration as it relates to undocumented workers. Obviously, Donald Trump, again, is attracting the vote of kind of lowly educated people having a hard time with his pledge to build a wall across the border with Mexico and to have the American government pay, the Mexican government pay for it. This sounds like heaven to the ears of the people who've kind of borne the brunt of inequality, because they see part of their problem as coming from competition for jobs from new immigrants, and especially from undocumented migrants, because they drive down wages. This is the perception. There's actually not much evidence to support this, or the evidence is very, very, very kind of tenuous. But the belief among Trump supporters is that immigration is really in good part responsible for their hard economic circumstances. And so the only way the Democrats can respond is by courting the Hispanic vote. The Hispanic population is growing as a proportion of the American population. It's growing all the time. Obama did very well among the Hispanic population. Hillary's hoping to do even better. So what we, by way of what we have is that actually the whole party system is realigning. No one knows really which social groups vote for which party. It's getting unpredictable. It used to be the case that we could ask people what their occupation was, what their education was, what their place of residence, urban, rural, was. And from those three pieces of information, you can get a very strong idea of how people would vote. And so basically, the Democratic vote was from urbanites, manufacturing workers, usually Protestant. That's all going. So there's an element of uncertainty. It's even more uncertain now than it was when Obama ran, because of these new issues, these free trade issues, these immigration issues. In addition to that, we have the candidates. In this particular election, the two candidates who have been nominated by the Democratic and the Republican parties to represent them in the battle for the presidency. I think that it is probably the case, well, certainly in modern American electoral history, there have never been two candidates who are both as unpopular as these two, as these two. So even, I mean, President Bush's father, George H.W. Bush, has declared, I mean, he was a Republican president of the United States, goddammit, and he's declared he's going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Ted Cruz caused a ruckus just yesterday or the day before when he declared, much against people's expectations, that he was going to vote for Trump.
Do you know the reason why he changed his mind?
He said early in his campaign for the Republican nomination that he would vote for the Republican nominee, and so he's kind of living up to his word, he says. But the other side of the coin, in a way, is, of course, the Republicans would rather have anyone than Hillary. This is a slight digression, but a major epiphany, a major crisis, trauma, occurred for the Republicans in 2008, in the 2008 election. This was the election, again, Hillary and Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, were the Democratic candidates for the presidential nomination. Obviously, Barack Obama won, but the Republicans, who essentially are a party of white males, they were traumatized by this because the Democratic candidates were a black man and a woman. This was, for them, they were losing their grips, in a sense, on American society. And so the other side of the coin is, Cruz says earlier, I'm going to support the nominee of my party, but most Republicans just hate Hillary Clinton with a vengeance. And so there's an element. Paul Ryan, for example, the leader of the House, he will not, I mean, he won't endorse Trump, but he won't reject him either. So that's Cruz's thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that we have two very unpopular candidates. You know, for many Americans, Trump is a racist, he's a bigot, he's a liar, all these things. I mean, not necessarily my views, this is what people say. Actually, the New York Times recently determined that for the first time in its history, it would call a presidential candidate a liar. And so they've never done it in the past, but they're now using, when they think it's appropriate, they're using the word liar to describe Trump. And this came about mainly because of the birther policy and Trump's backtracking on it. So you've got Trump. Many people question whether Trump should be commander-in-chief of the American military, whether he is able to kind of conduct a coherent foreign policy. They question his liking of and admiration for Mr. Putin in the Soviet Union. So there's a lot of reasons. A lot of people don't like Trump, but equally, a lot of people don't like Hillary. They don't trust her. They think, and there have been two big issues here recently, at least. Actually, Hillary Clinton has been involved in financial scandals since her husband first became president. There was the Whitewater scandal in the White House while they were in the White House in the first term, and two issues, well, three issues have not served her well. One, the attack on the American embassy in Benghazi. Two, the email server with her private emails, which she's still not owned up to. She's not said she's sorry for. You know, and then the more recent scandal was the claim made by the Republicans on the basis of emails that were released that she was selling influence when she was Secretary of State. If you wanted to see Hillary Clinton, if you wanted a meeting with Hillary Clinton, you had to fess up a lot of money to the Clinton Foundation. And so people just don't trust her. So there are different reasons for the dislike of the two candidates, but there is a depth of dislike that is unmatched in modern American history. And you know, so a lot of people say, well, what do I do? And this brings me to the second part of the talk. A lot of people are saying, most of them won't carry it out. We know this from past behaviours. A lot of Americans are entertaining voting for a third-party candidate, and there are two third-party candidates. There's always a communist runs for the presidency. There's always three socialists. There's usually 15, 16 candidates. We never see this, but there's usually about 15 candidates for the presidency. Okay. This year, the two most visible third-party candidates whom people are considering voting for are Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party and Jill Stein of the American Green Party. And large numbers of people are saying that they are considering switching their vote to one. So they can't stand either major party candidate. They want to vote because it's their civic duty, so they're talking about voting for a third party candidate. Why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem, I'm going to a very different line of thought now. It's a problem because of the way the American president is elected. The way the American president is chosen. We tend to think, well, I don't know if you do, but most of the students in my classes, and kind of the young 18, they really don't know much about politics. They tend to think that the American president is voted into office. That the person chosen is chosen on the basis of the way ordinary American people have voted. So like in France, for the French presidency, for example, he's what we call the French president is popularly elected. In other words, and I'm going to simplify this, but basically there's a presidential election, there'll be two candidates, and all French people vote for one or other candidate. And then at the end of the day, they just count up the votes across the country, and the candidate with the most votes wins, becomes the president of France. That's the way most Americans think that the American president is elected. But actually the American president is not elected that way. The American president is elected through an institution which is in the it's constitutionally mandated, is chosen through an institution called the Electoral College. The Electoral College is a body of 538 people, ordinary Americans. There are 538 of them because there is one member for each member of the House of Representatives, one member for each senator, so that's 435 members from reflecting the House of Representatives, 100 representing the Senate, which is 535, and then Washington, D.C. has 3 members of the Electoral College. And basically, in order to become president, the winning candidate has to get a majority of votes in the Electoral College. In other words, to become president, you have to get 270 Electoral College votes, minimum. Obviously, you'd like more. And this is why third-party candidates are important. If nobody gets that majority, there's one ballot, that's all. If no one gets a majority, because, say, Mr. Johnson has a lot of Electoral College votes, or Ms. Stein, that the election is thrown into the House of Representatives. In other words, the House of Representatives choose the next president if the Electoral College can't do so. And because there are 435 members of the House of Representatives, then assuming everybody votes.
Has never happened?
Yeah, 2000. In 2000.
But this is the Supreme Court decided.
Sorry?
This is Supreme Court decided in 2000. No.
Well, it went to the Supreme Court,
yes.
but it's a constitutional provision, so that it's not surprising the Supreme Court didn't overthrow it. They supported the Constitution. But in 2000, the 2 candidates were Al Gore for the Democratic Party, who had been Bill Clinton's vice president, and George W. Bush. It was his first run for the presidency. Actually, what happened was that Mr. Gore got about 500,000, not a small number of votes, he got about 500,000 popular votes, more than Mr. Bush. But Mr. Bush won the Electoral College vote because he won the big states. To give you some idea, basically, each state has an number of Electoral College votes equal to the total of its representatives and its senators. The largest state is California, and it has 55 in total. The population of California is approaching 40 million. It's kind of like almost a country in its own right. It's larger than many countries in the world. Montana, I think it is, North Dakota, Montana, one of the kind of less popular states, has 3. Because it's guaranteed 2 senators by the Constitution. Each state, regardless of size, has 2 senators. But its population size, and population size is the determinant of how many representatives you have. Its population size is so small that it only has the right to 1, and probably doesn't even deserve 4. But the idea of leaving a state unrepresented in the House would be Ohio,
How many? 18?
I think it's 18 or 20. Texas has 38. So you can see, well, 2 things. You can see why presidents target the big swing states. I mean, I mean, there have been studies done on this. Presidents never, in an election campaign, the candidates, they never go to Montana or kind of North Dakota or South Dakota. They just don't go there. There are just no votes. There's no electoral college votes. Because in 48 of the states, they vote as a bloc. So if Mr. Trump, for example, wins California, he might win it by 51% to 49%, right?
Then he take all the votes.
Sorry?
He win, then
he takes all 55 votes. The only exceptions are two small states, Maine and Nebraska, and they have a more proportional system. So in other words, if Mr. Trump gets 60%, Hillary gets 2%, basically Mr. Trump will get 3/5 of the delegates. Mrs. Clinton will get 2/5. So it's easy to see, you carry California, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, small number of other states, you're home. And that's why they are, that's why they campaign regularly. If you look at their pattern of campaigning, they go back to the same states all the time. And so the importance of third-party candidates is that they could very well stop either the Democratic or the Republican candidate getting a majority in the Electoral College. And then you would have a real constitutional crisis, because in 2000, the Supreme Court made the decision. Can you imagine what would happen in a country that's supposed to be democratic if the president is chosen by the House of Representatives, regardless of the popular vote? There was almost a constitutional, the only thing, well, not the only thing, but a constitutional crisis was prevented in 2000 because Mr. Gore graciously admitted defeat. I mean, in other words, Donald Trump, for example, will not graciously admit defeat. He's already saying everything's rigged in his, against him. This kind of. So if it does happen, for example, and it's not at all unreasonable, if it does happen that Donald Trump wins the popular vote, in other words, gets bigger share of the popular vote than Hillary Clinton, but that, as looks likely, Hillary Clinton gets the majority in the Electoral College, there's likely to be hell to pay. I mean, Trump is not going to go quietly. He won't do what Gore did in 2000 and just admit defeat, and he left the Senate and he just retired from political life. And what made 2000 even worse was that there was evidence. What won it for Mr. Bush was Florida, and his brother was governor of Florida at the time, and there's considerable evidence of hanky-panky, the election. So it was but a crisis was avoided. So when you're looking at the polls or you're reading about the election polls, who's in front, it doesn't really matter. If it's a national poll, it doesn't matter. What the campaign strategists do is they look at the state polls and then they kind of aggregate them. So what I've tried to, let me just summarize. What I've tried to do to this point is just to give you some idea why everything is so uncertain, and to do with kind of the evolution of the party system from a fairly straightforward left-right choice. If you were in favour of social welfare, government regulation, of the economy, etc., you voted Democrat. If you were against it, you voted Republican. This neat kind of bipolar choice got disrupted by the emergence of these morality issues, starting with abortion in 1964. But women's rights, African American voting rights, homosexual rights, environmental rights, believe it or not, are big separate. I mean, the Democrats are much, as we've seen with Mr. Obama, are much more in favour of the environment than the Republican. I don't say they're much more concerned about environmental degradation than the Republicans are. And now, in this election, the picture is complicated even further by the emergence of opposition to free trade. And I should just so that you realise that this is not unique to the United States. This opposition to free trade manifested itself in Brexit. I mean, it's the same story. There was one woman interviewed on British television, and she had voted to leave. And she really summed it up pretty well. She said, if you have money, you vote to stay. If you don't have money, you vote to leave. In other words, it was her opinion, and it's been shared by many American blue-collar workers in particular, particularly male. Free trade makes the rich rich, makes the poor poor. And so that in turn has led to an unprecedented visibility for third-party candidates. And they are important because of the electoral college. That's where they're important for us. It's you know, if they disrupt the ability of one of the candidates to get a majority in the electoral college, there will probably a constitutional crisis will follow. I should also say, and this is backtracking, but third-party candidates are not unusual in American history. They are very common. The most recent one of them was Ross Perot, who ran in 1992 and again in 1996. But in 1992, he got 19% of the popular vote. 1 American in 5 in 1992 voted for Ross Perot, who ran on an anti-free trade platform. He talked about that giant sucking sound to the south, by which he was referring to Mexico kind of taking all these American well-paying American manufacturing jobs. In that campaign, I've got to tell you this, and then maybe I'll make one last point, then I'll finish. In that campaign, there was a joke about Bill Clinton in the 1996 campaign, when Bill Clinton was running for re-election. And you know, Bill, at the time, he was a big guy. Had famous appetite. Him and the German Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, were known to be big eaters. And anyway, one day, Bill's been out jogging to kind of counteract his taste for Big Macs, but he goes into a McDonald's after a strenuous exercise, and behind the counter there's a middle-aged white guy, you know, making burgers. Just like normally we associate it with teenagers doing high school. There's this middle-aged white guy flipping burgers, and Bill starts talking. He says, "You know," he said, "in my first term as president, we created 8 million new jobs." And he said, "Yeah, and I've got 3 of them." I mean, by which he meant to say, look, all you've done is you've sent all our well-paying jobs away overseas, and so now we're unusually dependent on, unprecedentedly dependent on low-income minimum wage jobs. So last thing I'd like to point to, and I'll just do it, probably at least as important as the presidential election is what happens with the Senate and the House. And it's not clear. It looks pretty certain by all the polls and because of the gerrymandering that the House of Representatives will remain in the control of the Republican Party. But the Senate, much against expectations prior to Mr. Trump's nomination as the Republican candidate, actually the Senate looks like it might be an open race. Well, a lot of governorships have become open races as well. And the real prize here is the Supreme Court. The way Supreme Court justices are chosen is that they are nominated by the President and they have to have the support of 3/5 of the Senate, in other words, 60 senators. There's a possibility, and it's not that remote, there'll almost certainly be 2 vacancies in the next 4 years.
I think there's Ted Cruz considered one day.
Sorry?
Ted Cruz, he considered one day.
He can't?
He considered to be one.
You're saying Ted Cruz wanting to nominate for Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's why he changed his mind.
Oh. Well, it could be as many as 4. There could be as many as 4 Supreme Court justices replaced this year. This presidential term. And for most Republicans, even though they might hate Donald Trump, this is what's important. Because, and I'll finish it because it's quite controversial, actually the Supreme Court is much more influential in dictating the evolution of American society than politicians are. All the big decisions in modern American history have come from the Supreme Court. Now that's not to say the president's not important, I mean, you know, but if you look at the issues regarding morality, if you look at the issues regarding African American advancement, if you look, immigration once it gets there will become increasingly important. Most of the driving force, and particularly in the direction of allowing people sexual freedoms. So not discriminating against homosexuals, allowing for same-sex marriage. These are all Supreme Court decisions. And so it's a really big prize. So you should, if you're interested in the election and you know its consequences, you should not lose sight of the lower races. Actually, the presidency might be less important than.
How will Supreme Court influence free trade?
Sorry?
How will Supreme Court influence free trade?
Oh, I mean, it won't influence free trade. I mean, it's not a constitutional issue. But you know, most American politics has been beset in the last three decades by morality issues. I mean, this is what, if you look at the Tea Party, I mean, here you have, there's a sort of very good demonstration. There was a Tea Party demonstration, Mr. Obama's re-election in 2012. You know, the Tea Party is was trying to get the government out of social and economic life. Allegedly, they wanted less intervention, less regulation. And there's a lady there, an elderly lady, standing there saying, "Obama, keep your hands off my Medicare." I mean, you know, so she didn't even know that Medicare was a government-provided service. So that's, I mean, I think that with free trade, That's not, no, it's not going to be a Supreme Court issue.
I guess the class is about to finish.
Okay.
Parents are heading out. So why don't we thank Dr. Mughan first, and then if you have questions, you can stay and ask the questions. So thank you.